Welcome to session number 29 of an introduction to biblical prophecy. I'm Dr. John McMath. I'm joined by my friends in Italy, the Philippines, and a variety of other places, and no doubt some ships at sea. It's just hard to know who all is in. I keep a list over on the right side of everybody participating in the live session, but you never know who's going to check in on YouTube and Facebook. Today, we'll be looking at a continuation of the book of Revelation. We begin in chapter 8 with the blowing of the trumpets. The seventh seal is unfolded or undone, and that introduces the seven trumpet judgments. And so we'll be looking at the trumpets today, and I'm not sure how far we'll get, but we'll get a long way into the trumpets, probably beyond. The trumpet judgments are different from the seals judgments. The seals judgments seem to be spread out through the entire 7-year tribulation period, the 70th week of Daniel. It introduces the Antichrist with his wars and all of that bad stuff. It introduces the saints under the altar. It introduces the first dose of celestial destruction, big, bad, truly nasty, large-scale destruction that accompanies the wars of the end of this period. The entire 70th week is characterized by wars and rumors of wars. With the sixth seal, there is the actual presence of war just about everywhere, and the entire world will be affected to one extent or another, generally pretty bad. But this leads to the end of all things and ultimately the second coming. Like they say, it's all good. Let me see if I can make the screen share the way it's supposed to. There it goes. Wow, I didn't know that would work. So this seventh seal that we introduced last time takes us into the trumpet judgments. And the first 6 verses of this passage are an introduction, kind of lets things simmer for just a second. It's really important that the breaking of this seventh seal contains nothing but the trumpet judgments. So all of the trumpet judgments theoretically should fit into the period of the sixth seal destructive stuff. But it doesn't quite work that way. When we look at it, we're seeing in the trumpets a whole bunch of bad stuff, a lot of death and destruction, but it doesn't quite all fit into that sixth seal. It seems to go back a little farther. At any rate, it's certainly not a sequence. A lot of interpreters would like it to be a sequence of 6, 7 seals, followed by 7 trumpets in a row, followed by 7 people in a row, followed by 7 bowls in a row. And it doesn't really work that way very well. I've shown you this slide before, and I think this is helpful. It's certainly not to scale, and it isn't meant to be perfectly accurate. The 7 trumpets are focusing on probably the last half of the 70th week. the seven personages, and we'll get into that, and I'll show you what I mean by that. It seems to unfold all of history. It's focusing on the end time and events of the 70th week, but there are roots and background that go all the way back to the beginning of the fall of Satan. So that doesn't quite fit into the sequence. When we get down to the seven bowl judgments, we're going to see again the focus on the second half, probably the last third of the 70th week. All of this just prior to the downward blue arrow, which is the second coming. And that's followed by all of the last things, the 1,000-year millennial kingdom, the release of Satan at the end of that time, the beginning of the eternal state, the New Jerusalem. All of that is going to be at the very end. We've looked at this before, but I think sometimes it's helpful. So the 8th chapter starts off with the Lamb breaking the 7th seal. And that introduces things. There was silence in heaven for about half an hour. This is John reporting this, and his vision is in the heavenly places. And as the silence wears on for half an hour, here come seven angels standing before God. And the implication is these are seven angels who stand continuously before God. This is their one duty. Now, perhaps not for all eternity, but this is their station. They're not being gathered from other jobs. This is their primary function. So these are the angels who stand before God, and seven trumpets were given to them. Some have suggested that the seven angels are identical to the seven spirits. And frankly, we don't know. I'm not sure we have a solution for that particular problem yet. But suffice it to say that this is all part of the mystery of the throne room of God. And the seven angels are given trumpets. And these seven trumpets are going to be blown one after another to introduce a sequence of seven judgments. The third verse introduces an angel with a golden censer filled with incense, which represents the prayers of the saints. This is built on the Old Testament concept of the altar of incense in the holy place in the tabernacle. And that was a symbol of prayer. So always in Christian tradition, in the Eastern churches particularly, but also in Roman Catholic churches, incense is sometimes used as a symbol of prayer. And that's okay. I don't particularly like it, but it's yeah, I have trouble enough breathing as it is, and the incense doesn't help. But that gives Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches their peculiar smell. When you go into some of these old churches, and the incense kind of coats everything, and you can definitely smell it. This is followed by peals of thunder, lightning, and this introduces the next sequence. The angel took the censer with the fire from the altar, and he threw it to the earth, and there followed peals of thunder, sounds and flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. So the thunder, lightning, earthquake sequence represents the beginning of more catastrophe. It's interesting how a thunderstorm always reminds people of catastrophe and judgment. Uh, Back when I was learning to fly, the instructor always said, if you see a thunderstorm uh, closer than 20 miles, get on the ground right away. You don't want to fool with it. You want to stay away from those things because they'll break your airplane. Now, big airplanes can kind of handle it a little better, but the little aluminum boxes that I flew in would probably have gotten broken. So the seventh seal introduces these trumpets, and we're going to start off with a sequence of 6 trumpets that, in fact, is broken up into a sequence of 4 and then 3 more. And the first 4 trumpets work together somewhat. The first trumpet introduces hail and fire and blood all over the place, and it kills a third of mankind. There's a mountain of fire that is dumped into the sea, and that kills a third of all of the animals in the sea. And then there's a great torch called wormwood, which poisons all the water. And then finally, there is darkness all over the earth. So let's read through that. What we're seeing here is really a sequence of 4 bad, and I would say really bad, uh, truly awful sequences of events. These are catastrophic, but they're not final. This is a whole bunch of bad stuff that affects the whole earth, as far as we can tell. It's certainly not limited to the Middle East alone. There's a lot of end time events which seem to have a Middle Eastern focus. Uh, Certainly, Jerusalem is always the core. Babylon, which we'll get to in quite a bit of detail as we go on, uh, are always at the core. And the concluding war of the 70th week definitely takes place outside of Jerusalem. It's an Israel versus the surrounding nations and perhaps other nations of the world uh, in the territory around Jerusalem. So a Middle Eastern war is the conclusion of things. But we've got these other judgments, and it's very difficult to see this as a focus on anything short of the whole world. So there's a lot of damage going on. So, verse 5, verse 6, the 7 angels prepared themselves to sound. The first sounded in verse 7, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood thrown to the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Okay. Now, it doesn't say how many were dead, but lots and lots of damage. A third of the earth was burned. So a massive firestorm, probably a sequence of massive firestorms. Now, how is this caused? It actually doesn't say that there is any natural cause to this. Sometimes we like to pretend that we can guess. Well, oh, this has to be nuclear bombs. Well, not necessarily. The text actually says that this is a supernatural event, that God is causing this catastrophe to happen in much the same way as Moses caused the 10 plagues by unleashing the power of God. So God is entirely capable of doing all of these things completely without the help of any technology. However, it's interesting to note that, at least in theory, we have the technology to do most of these things, which I suppose is not an encouraging word. But anyway, the hail and the fire and all the green stuff. Then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. So there again, a very, very large catastrophic event. What is a mountain of fire? John says something like a mountain of fire. What does that mean? Well, it was a great big object with fire. And we don't know what that is exactly. Again, the best interpretation is that this is a miraculous thing that God is doing as an act of pure catastrophic judgment. So a mountain of fire and a third of everything is destroyed in the oceans. A third of the creatures died, and a third of the ships at sea. If you've ever looked, there's a on the internet, there's um, a map program that traces the movement of all the ships at sea at any given time. I don't know how they do that. I think the ships are required to have some kind of transponder that communicates with low Earth orbit satellites, but I don't really know. They seem to have GPS coordinates and they're broadcasting these, and it's got to be a satellite thing. But each ship identifies itself with its registration number, and you can see them moving around. There's thousands at any given time. So how would you wipe out a third of them? That would actually be quite the event. This is followed then by the third angel sounding his trumpet, uh, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on the third of the rivers and on the springs of water. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And a third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. So this sounds like some kind of a poison. Uh, it doesn't really say. Wormwood is a mysterious term. It's assumed to be some kind of poison. Uh, the great star falling from heaven is probably not an actual star, but rather a very large object entering the Earth's atmosphere and burning. Now, this one again is probably best understood as a purely supernatural event, something that God creates at the miraculous level. And this thing, whatever it is, has the power to turn the waters to a poisonous substance, and a whole lot of people die from the wormwood. Okay, now these are interesting on some levels. There's a lot of interpreters who try to figure out precisely what this is in natural terms. I don't think we need to go there. I don't see that there's a reason to interpret any of this as anything other than a purely supernatural event. The darkness, again, the fourth angel sounded, and the third of the sun and a third of the moon and a third of the stars were struck, so that a third of them would be darkened and the day would not shine for a third of it, and the night in the same way, which is not exactly clear in English. It's less clear in Greek. The impression that we get is that the total light output onto the earth will be cut by one third. How does that happen? Well, again, we don't know. But it sounds like a miraculous event. It's a catastrophic miracle. Uh, some interpreters, as always, prefer to assign natural modern technology to this. I don't think that's necessary. Again, all four of these trumpets seem to be pure acts of the wrath of God, and they're wrathful in a catastrophic way. Now, once we've gone through these four, and you notice that the first four, like the first four seals, are very briefly outlined. These are major catastrophic events of judgment, but they're summarized in just a few verses. As we go on into the next section, we're going to see more happening. Let's see the introduction to that at 8 and verse 13. And I looked, and I heard an eagle flying in mid-heaven, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth because of the remaining blast of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound." So the message there is that we're not through yet. We've seen the first four, but you haven't seen anything until you've seen these last three. These are three more very bad things that are going to uh, move the sequence along. The next sequence, the fifth trumpet, gives us considerably more detail. It's the same pattern that we saw with the seals. So 4 seals, 4 trumpets. Then the fifth seal opens up into a much larger scene. In the same way, the fifth trumpet is going to open up into a much larger scene. And this is the first 12 verses of chapter 9. This is a classic passage. I call this the grasshoppers from hell, because back in the 70s. I mean, seriously, if you're old enough to remember the 70s, you may remember that everybody was really enthusiastic about um, understanding the book of Revelation. The Vietnam War was just coming to a conclusion, and everybody assumed that these giant locusts coming out of the pit had to be helicopters. And I'll show you why they say that. Because these things do sound a little bit like helicopters. This is a picture of, actually, it's a picture from a movie, Apocalypse Now, which is about the Vietnam War. But these are UH-1H helicopter gunships, the famous Huey gunships that were used during the Vietnam War. And I can't tell you how many interpreters from that historical period, the 70s, uh, simply assumed that this is all about helicopters. Uh, and I don't agree. I think that helicopters are a good image for this, but there's a very, very strong spiritual dynamic going on here. The supernatural is most likely at the core of this, because the helicopters don't come from hell. Helicopters come from some big helicopter factory, most likely in California, or somewhere in Russia. The Russians also make quite good helicopters, and these days we're getting helicopters all over the world. Yeah, but I'm not sure we're talking about that. I think there's a supernatural thing going on here. So let me read a bit of this. The fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven, which had fallen to the earth, and the key of the bottomless pit was given to him. Bottomless pit is sometimes translated abyss, which means a really, really, really deep hole. The term is used in the Old Testament of Hades or of hell. The the picture that we have in the Old Testament is of an angel, one of the guardian angels, falling from heaven to be placed into a bottomless pit. This is the famous passages are in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, where in one the king of Babylon and the other the king of Tyre are portrayed as the star of the morning, fallen from heaven. How are you fallen from heaven? Oh, light bearer. The word Lucifer is introduced in the Old Testament. Son of the dawn, star of the morning, the bearer of light. So Satan is this beautiful angel who falls from his position and becomes the king of hell, as it were. That's the bottomless pit imagery that we have here. So he had fallen to earth, and he was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit. So who's doing this? Well, Satan is. Satan is given the authority or the opportunity here to open up the pit of hell itself. And the smoke went up out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. So there can be very little question here. This is a satanic event, and the pit itself is hell. And in verse 3, out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth. Okay, so the locusts come directly out of hell. Again, if these are helicopters, they're some kind of a demonic helicopter. They are specifically called locusts. Now, locusts were very common in the ancient world. When things were dry and very hot, the locusts would come up out of the sub-Saharan Africa, and they would cross the desert, and they would cover the entire Middle East, or at least regions at a time would be infested by these locusts, and they were a very bad thing. A locust plague normally meant starvation because every green thing would be eaten. So locusts become a symbol of God's judgment. The locusts are a picture of judgment. And I believe the best way to understand the locusts is simply as supernatural evil beings. They have the power to hurt rebellious men. They were told not to hurt the grass, nor any green thing, nor any tree, which has already been damaged by the first four of the trumpets. On this trumpet, the locusts aren't permitted to hurt any of that, but only the men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. Now we know that the 144,000, the so-called Jewish evangelists, have received a seal on their foreheads. I'm not sure about the vast multitude coming out of the tribulation period. Sounds like those are already dead, and they've died and gone on to be present with the Lord in heaven. So the 144,000 are still alive and well and doing their work, but they're not allowed to be damaged by these supernatural locusts. The locusts only have the power to hurt rebellious men. And so out they came, and the power was given to them as scorpions have power. In verse 5, they were not permitted to kill anyone, but to torment for 5 months. So for 5 months, these locusts have a kind of scorpion sting, and they torment like this torment of a scorpion when it stings. And in those days, verse 6 is interesting. Men will seek death, but will not find it. This is a kind of torment that frankly, I wouldn't want from my worst enemy. This is a very bad thing. They will long to die, and death flees from them. So a very bad, very destructive, really awful time. Then we get a little more description of the locusts. The appearance of the locusts was like horses. It doesn't say the locusts were horses. Uh, this is uh, this is a kind of figure that we often get in the apocalyptic literature. In the Old Testament, the book of Ezekiel does this. Also Zechariah, Daniel to some extent. In the New Testament, the book of Revelation is the place where we find this. And the vision that is given to the prophet is something so difficult to describe that he uses what we're calling here phenomenological language. He's describing the phenomenon, the thing that he sees, with the best words that he can pick. He doesn't really have words for what he's seeing, but he's describing it with words that would be understandable to his readers. So he says their appearance was like war horses. He doesn't say this was war horses. Their appearance was like war horses. And as it goes on, and all of this should be assumed to be the same kind of phenomenological language. Horses prepared for battle. On their heads appeared to be crowns like gold. They weren't golden crowns, and they weren't really crowns, but it looked like gold crowns. And their faces were like the faces of men. They're not really men, but it looked like that. And they had hair like the hair of women. So long hair, and their teeth were like the teeth of lions. The teeth of lions. Okay. Uh, None of this fits together very well. And unless you draw a grinning jaw full of teeth on the front of a helicopter, it doesn't make it look like helicopters either. And some have done that. Some soldiers like to paint their helicopters. So maybe that's what we've got here, but not necessarily. Teeth were like the teeth of lions. They had breastplates, like breastplates of iron. Okay, it was like that. It's not iron, but it kind of looks like that. Some kind of armor. Um, Locusts actually look like they're wearing armor with their exoskeletons. And again, they look like locusts. Uh, and they've got breastplates. The sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots, of many horses rushing to battle. That's one of the details that most of the older interpreters like to say clinches the deal. It has to be helicopters. If you've ever heard a whole bunch of helicopters coming in for an attack, sounds just like thundering horses. Okay, I'll give them that. I've never heard a whole bunch of helicopters at once, but I'm sure they're loud. Uh, and they have tails like scorpions and stings. And in their tails is their power to hurt men for 5 months. Okay, the tail of a helicopter is not usually where the weapons are stored. So this is a detail that doesn't work at all. The weapons are typically stored in side pods on the helicopter, or sometimes underneath the helicopter. There'll be a machine gun or a Gatling gun of some kind. The ability of helicopters to hurt people is undisputed, but I don't really think that it's necessary to go that way. So war horses, breastplates, hair, chariots, what are we looking at? Well, we don't know exactly. Sort of like locusts. And I honestly think that the best thing to call these guys is grasshoppers from hell. With tongue firmly in cheek. I know they're not grasshoppers, but some kind of supernatural evil beings, some kinds of demonically empowered creatures from the abyss, from the depths of hell itself. Okay, with the power to do a great deal of damage, and they have a king over them, the angel of the abyss. Now, the angel of the abyss is again Satan himself. Lucifer is the angel of the abyss. That's where he's been cast. And his name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, he has the name Apollyon. Now, both Abaddon and Apollyon are only used in the Bible in this passage, which makes it interesting. Apollyon is the Greek version. Abaddon is the Hebrew version. The best guess of scholars as to the meaning of these terms is that both refer to destruction or a destructive element, a destructive character. So the central character of Lucifer, of the devil, of Satan, is that he is destructive. Now, this makes him the obvious anti-God character. They're God and anti-God, or Christ and antichrist, where God is creative. He begins with nothing and makes something out of it. Satan's tendency in the world is to take something that God has created for good and destroy it, to ruin it, to break it as much as possible. You can often tell the difference between uh, the godly element of any society and the ungodly element of any society because of the results of their work. When the godly work together and work on what God has given them to, they build things, they make things, they create. They create families, they create cities, they create businesses, they create wealth. When the evil have control of any society, the brokenness becomes manifest. They tend to destroy things. They destroy cities, they destroy families, they destroy happiness, they destroy people, they destroy health. And the two elements of society are uh, constantly striving against one another. So when John says the spirit of Antichrist is already in the world, in the same way that the spirit of Christ is present in the form of the church, the spirit of Antichrist is also present in the world. There are those who love God and want to build, and there are those who hate God and love the devil. and want to destroy everything that's good. I think as we approach the end of time, we're going to see that division among men becoming more and more obvious. There are those who love the destruction that comes out of the pit of hell. They love seeing that spread through the world. And there are those of us who hate that and wish that it would stop so that creative things could be built. That's the fundamental division in mankind. And so this whole chapter, I think, has some application. Now, what's going to happen here? I think it's symbolic of all of history, but it's a specific sequence of events that add a bit more to the horror of the judgment of this end time. Then the sixth trumpet is going to sound, and this one is interesting. I've always kind of wondered what to do with this crazy little section. It says, the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God. So again, this is initiated. Each of these trumpet judgments is initiated by God himself. In the same way that the seven seal judgments are initiated by an act of God, so are the seven trumpet judgments. I've emphasized the work of Satan in all of these things, but understand that in every case, God unleashes Satan. God permits Satan. These things are in on the order of God's judgment on the world, but he's using Satan to do the actual work. And that becomes really important when we need to argue with people who say that their rapture will only happen before the wrath of God, not necessarily before the tribulation. The so-called pre-wrath rapture argument argues that none of this stuff, the seals and the trumpets, none of those are a part of the wrath of God. I would say, no, this is all from the beginning of this is the wrath of God. Well, the sixth angel sounded his trumpet, and a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, and one saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. So there are four angels, and I'm going to assume that these are evil angels. These are demons of some sort. And they are bound in this place near the river Euphrates. Now, there's an actual river Euphrates. It forms the Tigris and Euphrates Valley, forms the area that we call Mesopotamia or modern Babylon. Iraq has the Tigris and Euphrates River. Beyond that, farther east is Iran, which is the gateway to Central Asia, which is a very interesting place. The old spice route, or not the spice route, that's by sea. The Silk Route, the Silk Road, goes through Central Asia, crosses the northern reaches of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, goes up into the Iranian plateau, and out beyond the big lake that's up there, Lake Baikal, I believe it is. The road heads up toward places like Samarkand and Tashkent. Today, these are divided up into a series of former Soviet provinces that we call the stands. Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all of the stands are in a row up there. This is Central Asia. And the Silk Road went from Europe all the way to China. And it hasn't been an active road for many, many centuries. It's been a long, long time since that was had any commercial reality to it. But honestly, the Chinese in modern times, just in the last several decades, have initiated a thing called the Road and Belt Initiative. A part of that is an attempt to rebuild the set of alliances that would be necessary for a commercial connection between China and Europe, and between China and Africa, which would take it through the Middle East. The Chinese are doing this through a pattern of commercial ventures and loans and other things. I don't entirely trust them, but it's not a bad idea. It really it makes commercial and political sense on a lot of levels. So why do I bring up the Chinese? Well, because the commentators who look at this passage have tried long and hard to figure out who are these armies. So the four angels have been prepared for the hour and the day and the month and the year were released so that they would kill a third of mankind. Okay, so it's the angels who are going to be killing a huge number of people, a third of mankind, using the number, verse 16, the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million, which is a really, really large number. John says, I heard the number of them, which suggests that John also was a bit surprised at how large a number this is. Now, right off the bat, I have to give you full disclosure here. Large numbers in the Bible are often a problem. We know that in the Old Testament, the thousands are very difficult to identify precisely. They sometimes simply mean a large number. In the New Testament, the numbers are more trustworthy. But when you get up to numbers like this, 200 million is really a large number. And that isn't a good translation from the Greek. It's something like 2 times myriads of myriads. And the number is deliberately obscure. It's not a precise number. Nevertheless, let's go with 200 million. We definitely can't count on that being precise, but it does indicate a very, very large number. They are reported as coming from the east, okay, from the Euphrates. The number of the armies, 200 million. And this is how I saw the vision of the horses and those who sat on them. The riders had breastplates the color of fire and of hyacinth and of brimstone. The heads of the horses are like the heads of lions, and out of their mouths proceed fire and smoke and brimstone. Okay. So that sounds really huge. Now, the only nation that could possibly pose a threat like that today, if this is a purely natural thing, the only nation that could possibly pose a threat like this is China. China has claimed to have 200 million Chinese men under arms. I can't confirm that. If they do, they are probably not fully equipped. They are certainly not set up for armored or mechanized war. If there are 200 million Chinese, they're probably entirely infantry. And the Bible speaks of this 200 million soldier army mounted for battle. Now, in the New Testament, a mounted army would have been cavalry. Today, cavalry means tanks and armored personnel carriers and trucks. And the Chinese simply don't have that kind of equipment. They could build it, but today they don't have that kind of equipment. The fire and the brimstone are, again, those are symbolic terms. Fire and brimstone come out of volcanoes, and a whole lot of judgments in the Bible seem to involve fire and brimstone. So the picture is of a judgment from God. I'm afraid I have to reject the notion of a Chinese army simply because the Chinese today don't have the capability of moving or supplying that number of people. They just don't. I think it's better to understand this as a supernatural army, a demonic army, but leaving the possibility that as time goes on, a Chinese army with these capacities could do this job. It is possible. In some ways, it may be better to take this as a literal earthly army, than frankly, that's hard to apply. There's all kinds of problems, no matter how we understand this passage. It's best in general terms to say that in the end, God is going to send a mighty army to fight in these battles of the end time. And there they are. These are bad guys. And a third of mankind was killed by these three plagues, by the fire, the smoke, and the brimstone, which proceeded out of their mouth. A third of mankind, but they're primarily, if they're crossing from the Euphrates River, they're primarily aiming at a Middle Eastern target. I have all kinds of questions. And that's a problem that we have when we try to make these images in Revelation, as I say, get down on all fours. It doesn't really work, and it just makes our lives more difficult. If we understand this at the generic level, that this is what appears to John to be a mighty army with fire and brimstone and mounted soldiers crossing into the place and killing a third of mankind, it means this is a really, really, really bad thing. It's a really terrible thing. And the rest of mankind, well, let's go back up to verse 19. The power of the horses is in their mouths and their tails. Their tails are like serpents and have heads with which they do harm. And the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues. And this is the important part. This is where it tells us we're getting very close to the end of the 70th week. Those who were not killed by the plagues and did not repent of the works of their hands, so as not to worship demons and the idols of gold and silver and of brass and stone and wood, which can neither hear nor work, and they did not repent of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their immorality, nor of their thefts. If you look back at what they need to repent of, you see that it's primarily violations of the 10 first principles, what we sometimes call the 10 commandments. These are people who have rejected God. They worship idols. They picked material objects of one sort or another that are less than God. They have rejected the family. They've rejected the truth. They've rejected life itself. They're murderers. They are liars. They are thieves. They are looters. The image of those who are left at the end is of those who have fallen short of God's intention for mankind. And at the very end, under extreme pressure, they hide from God and continue to fail to repent. Yes, that's where we're going to leave it off for today. That's the sixth trumpet. We're going to see after this, we're going to see an interlude in chapters 10 and 11 that we'll look at next week, followed by the unleashing finally of the seven symbolic personages who will fill up the next bit of the judgment. When we see the seventh trumpet, we're going to hear an announcement of the beginning of the kingdom of God, which will be on earth at that point. So these seven trumpets, unlike the seven seals, the seven trumpets take us right up to the second coming and the beginning of the kingdom age. But then once that's announced, they back off and take us back through history again. So there we go. This just keeps on getting more and more complex, and yet all of it can be understood. So we're going to quit there, and let's unmute everybody. We'll ask to unmute, and then I can hear everybody now. As this goes along, the mysteries just keep piling up one on another. We have to be careful to remember the principle of deliberate obscurity. Not everything is told. In the next little bit, there's going to be seven thunders. And John was getting ready to write down what the seven thunders said, and the angel says, no, don't write that down. That'll be clear in the end, but for now, don't write that down. There are many things going on in this book which are not clear, but they will be clear when it all happens. On the broad scale, the book is actually clear. It's clear that there are 7 years at the end of time, just prior to the kingdom of the Messiah, where terrible wrath is going to be poured out on the earth. This is the picture of that. It's not a perfectly understandable picture because we haven't seen it yet, and it's something that's too terrible for our words, probably. Nevertheless, it refers to historical events in the future that have not taken place yet. When they happen, they'll be historical, and we will understand them when we see them. But there we go for now. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place. I believe the Philippines will still be seeing us at 3:30 in the morning. Then the following week, I think, is daylight savings time in Italy, and that will push the American time back to 11:30 and the Filipino time back to 2:30. But I'll give you a bit more on that as we get closer. Bye-bye, everybody. Love y'all. See you next time. Ciao, ciao.
Bye, Dr.
Bye, Dr. John.
Bye-bye, guys.
Ciao po.
I love